An Ontario school board is training their staff that the word family is harmful and racist.
The Carney government has tabled a sweeping new border security bill that will grant authorities the power to intercept communications without a court-approved warrant.
British Columbia Premier David Eby says no to a new oil pipeline through the province. Hello Canada, it's Thursday, June 5th, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Isaac Lamoureux.
And I'm Geoff Knight.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. Waterloo Region District School Board staff are being trained that the word family is a harmful concept rooted in white supremacy. True North obtained internal training materials delivered to the staff at Waterloo Oxford District Secondary School by the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, which assert that terms like objectivity, perfectionism, and worship of the written word are hallmarks of whiteness and upholding white supremacy. In Culturally Relevant Pedagogy by Laura May Lindo, one slide states that, quote, biases are the socialized teachings of the white culture, and we use keywords and phrases to promote the dominant culture. One of the offensive words in question is family, which is said to be harmful to racialized students because it implies male authority, demands obedience without question, and erodes personal boundaries by, quote, prioritizing the family's needs. Another slide asserts that asking for evidence for claims of racism or acknowledging racism toward white people is a characteristic of whiteness that must be dismantled. The pain and hurt and discomfort are not ancillary to anti-racism work, they are the guts of it, it says. Without them, change simply does not happen. The WRDSB's 2024 workforce census reports that 90% of staff are white and 79% are women. Another slide promotes the use of BIPOC affinity groups, described as exclusive, invitation-only spaces for non-white staff or students. These groups are deliberately kept confidential, justified by the claim that school culture is inhospitable to racial minorities. A source within the board who provided the materials and asked to remain anonymous questioned whether the messaging truly reflects the views of most staff. The source said, quote, teachers just want to get on with their job of teaching. Ideology, if you will, is just something many teachers acknowledge as being present. They just want to get on with their jobs. True North reached out to the WRDSB for comment but did not receive a response. Anti-racist hiring practices have followed similar lines. On March 23, WRDSB hosted a job fair specifically for Indigenous, Black, and racialized individuals. The stated rationale was to ensure that students see themselves reflected in the education system. So, Geoff, for the average Canadian parent, has so-called anti-racism in education gone too far?
The average Canadian parent is definitely likely to view the anti-racism training as a step too far. A 2023 Angus Reid poll found that 62% of Canadians believe schools should focus on core academics like math and reading rather than these types of social issues, with only 18% supporting the inclusion of anti-racism as a primary education focus. This suggests that parents on average prioritize practical education over ideological training, which aligns with the WRDSB's source's comment that teachers just want to get on with their jobs. The idea of banning words like family, of all things, or framing objectivity as a hallmark of whiteness likely strikes many as excessive, even offensive, especially when 54% of parents in a 2024 Leger poll expressed concern that schools are overemphasizing identity politics at the expense of basic learning. Moreover, the push for exclusive BIPOC affinity groups and race-specific job fairs like the one WRDSB held on March 23rd for Indigenous, Black, and racialized individuals may further alienate parents who value inclusivity over segregation. A 2022 Environics Institute survey showed that 67% of Canadians oppose race-based hiring practices in public institutions, preferring merit-based approaches, which contrasts with the WRDSB's anti-racist hiring rationale. While the board's workforce census notes 90% of staff are white, the average parent might question whether such measures address representation without fostering division, especially when only 29% of Canadians in the same survey felt anti-racism training in schools was effective. For many parents, these initiatives likely feel disconnected from their primary concern, which is ensuring their children receive a quality education. The Carney government proposed a border security bill that would grant sweeping new powers to authorities, such as intercepting communications and accessing information without a court-approved warrant. The primary goals of the legislation, known as Bill C-2, are to secure the border, combat organized crime, crack down on fentanyl smuggling, and bolster the authorities' ability to fight against financial crimes. If passed, the bill would allow the government to intercept and search communications, including mail. It also includes new provisions for anti-money laundering rules, asylum claimants, and the Canadian Coast Guard. It would also extend the Canadian Security Intelligence Service's access to information, including gathering certain data without a court-approved warrant. Public Safety Minister Gary Anandasangare told reporters, quote, "In order for me to bring forward legislation, it needed to have the safeguards in place. It needed to be in line with the values of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and I fundamentally believe that we have struck the balance." Tabled on Tuesday, the legislation would also prohibit people in Canada from having their refugee claims heard by a tribunal if they've already been in the country for more than a year. Additionally, the government would be permitted to cancel or pause immigration applications en masse if deemed to be in the public interest. There would be exceptions for those fleeing war zones, such as those coming from Gaza or Ukraine. The bill would also extend the Canadian Security Intelligence Service's access to information, including gathering certain data without a court-approved warrant. The Canada Border Services Agency's ability to search containers leaving would also be broadened by requiring transport and warehouse operators to provide site access to border agents for inspections before exportation. It also intends to fix a loophole often abused in the Safe Third Country Agreement with the U.S., whereby asylum claims are made 14 days after an applicant furtively enters Canada from the U.S. by land. The legislation comes in response to mounting pressure of U.S. President Donald Trump's administration, which has accused the Canadian government of being too lax when it comes to border security. So, Isaac, is the Strong Border Act a step in the right direction in securing Canada, or an encroachment on the Canadians' rights and freedoms?
Yeah, Geoff. So the Strong Border Act is drawing debate across Canada because it strikes at the heart of two competing national priorities, security and civil liberties. The bill could support border security, as you mentioned, by cracking down on organized crime, fentanyl smuggling, abuse of the asylum system. These enhancements would occur as U.S. officials pressure Canada to tighten enforcement, and the expanded powers for intelligence and border authorities could be seen as crucial to keeping up with modern threats, including financial crimes and smuggling operations that exploit legal loopholes. However, sweeping surveillance powers such as warrantless communication interception and mail searches are potential violations of Canadians' charter rights to privacy and due process. The authority to cancel immigration applications en masse or to bar refugee claims based on time spent in Canada also could raise some immigration concerns. But Public Safety Minister Gary Anandasangare insists the bill is charter compliant and balanced, but that doesn't mean it isn't leaving room for abuse and overreach. Ultimately, whether it's a step forward or an overreach depends on how those new powers are used and overseen. Canadians will need to weigh the benefits of stronger border enforcement against the risks of eroding long-standing civil protections. And this debate echoes past moments in history, perhaps most notably after 9/11, when airport security was overhauled at the cost of passenger convenience and privacy. Was the trade-off worthwhile? Many would say yes, but it sparked the same tension between security and freedom that underpins this legislation. British Columbia Premier David Eby is throwing shade on the pipeline consensus presented by his colleagues at the meeting between Canada's premiers and Prime Minister Mark Carney earlier this week. Carney previously said he would support building pipelines if certain conditions were met, one of them being consensus among provinces. Eby was notably absent from Monday's meeting, where his peers suggested that the aforementioned consensus had been met, with numerous premiers celebrating the future of pipelines and none opposing. However, Eby said he would not support building a new oil pipeline through BC. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre said that given Carney's claim that a pipeline would only occur if a consensus was met, Eby's opposition adds to the non-consensus within the Liberal cabinet. Poilievre said, quote, "So despite grand statements, press conferences, and meetings, Liberals have no plan to get one built, leaving us helplessly reliant on the Americans. More elbows down from the Liberals." As for the non-consensus within the Liberal cabinet, Canadian Culture Minister Stephen Guilbeault previously claimed developers don't want to build new pipelines. His comments came despite him being shuffled off the environment file. However, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith demanded that the new Environment Minister, Julie DeBrussen, disavow the misleading comments made by Guilbeault. When speaking at the final press conference of the First Minister's meeting, Smith outlined the optical economics scenario for a pipeline to be built in BC. She said, quote, "The Pathways project is an expensive project. It would cost anywhere from $10 to $20 billion to get built, and to make the economic case for that, having more egress with more barrels to be sold to Asia is a way to pay for it." Eby did not attend the meeting because he had already planned to attend a 10-day trip to Asia to diversify the province's trade relationship. Deputy Premier Nikki Sharma attended in his absence. So, Geoff, despite the note of consensus that we saw from the premiers and prime minister at the First Ministers' conference, Premier Eby seems to be bucking the consensus. How does his refusal to support an oil pipeline running through BC impact Canada's ability to sell its oil?
David Eby's refusal to support a new oil pipeline through British Columbia significantly hampers Canada's ability to expand its oil export markets, particularly to Asia. BC's strategic position on the Pacific coast makes it a critical gateway for shipping oil to Asian markets, which Alberta Premier Daniel Smith highlighted as key to justifying the $10 to $20 billion Pathways project. Without a pipeline through BC, Canada remains heavily reliant on the U.S. market, where 97% of its oil exports currently go. This dependency limits Canada's ability to diversify trade partners and capitalize on growing Asian demand, where countries like China and India are projected to increase oil consumption by 1.2 million barrels per day by 2030, as per the International Energy Agency. Eby's stance also aggravates existing infrastructure constraints, as Canada's current pipeline capacity is already strained. The Trans Mountain expansion, completed in 2024, added 590,000 barrels per day, but is now at full capacity with no new major projects in sight. His opposition directly undermines the economic case for new pipelines, as Smith noted, by blocking access to higher-priced Asian markets where Canadian heavy oil could fetch $5 to $10 more per barrel compared to U.S. prices. This bottleneck keeps Canada tethered to discounted U.S. sales, costing the industry an estimated $20 billion annually in lost revenue, while Eby's absence from the First Ministers' meeting and his trade-focused Asia trip signal a prioritization of other economic avenues over oil exports, further stalling national energy goals.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.